sau profesionale și vă asigur că vom ține cont de ele, chiar și în timpul dezbaterii, pe cât posibil, dar cu siguranță...
We will make sure we will take into account about all these aspects in the conclusions we are going to prepare. Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank you for having accepted this invitation, even if the subject I proposed is a difficult one, requiring complex approaches. However, this is a topic which has been treated for a long time only from a rural agricultural perspective. The rural areas and their problems become more and more complex, and many of us are attached to the rural areas, either because we spent our childhood there or maybe because we are attracted to the rural area. But very few times we really discussed about the specificities of the rural area in the EU, and in particular regarding the way in which we can include, we can integrate this dimension in our decision. European states are headed toward a strong convergence every year, elections after elections. In terms of political colors, the contrast between urban and rural is more and more pronounced, and we can see this difference everywhere across the EU member states. This polarization is obvious when we look at political maps. In fact, I've been seeing it for more than 30 years in Romania, and I know this is a well-known phenomenon in other parts of the EU. It seems that the way forward advocated by some is completely different from that advocated by others, depending on where they live. It's as if our increasingly urban society has inevitably and gradually turned away from its rural roots. It seems that the townsfolk are choosing different parties and different policies than the ones chosen by people living in the villages. As many of the participants here know, I refuse to believe in a future separation between rural and urban, between peasants and townsfolk. I refuse to believe that this is an unavoidable trend. And besides, I believe that the political priorities I defined at the beginning of this mandate at the European Parliament bring about a reconciliation, or at least a unity potential between our urban and rural centers. And I would like to thank you, Madam President of the European Commission, Madam von der Leyen, for being here with us. I know the rural area is close to your heart, and at the beginning of this mandate, you made some public commitments regarding the way in which the European Commission will deal with the rural dimension in all its complexity. This challenge of integrating the rural population in our European political project will be one of the strongest indicators measuring our success or failure at the end of the mandate. The agri-food issues, the democratic issues in the democratic policies do not stop at the city gates or at the doorstep of the rural area. And still, we have to recognize that more too often, the rural area feels at the outskirts, forgotten by the urban culture. Besides, many young people are attracted by the city lights, and many rural areas are still emptying at an alarming rate. On the other hand, there's a counter phenomenon we've been seeing for some years, the counter migration from the city to the village. It still doesn't compensate the other way around kind of migration, but we can see that more and more people are attracted by the rural area, by the contact with the nature, and by being close to the place where food is produced, being close to landscapes. We can see young people aiming at building a new modern life with access to all the modern facilities, but in the rural area. And we can even see a cooperation between young people in this approach. in this endeavor. But in order to make sure that the number of people increases, people choosing rural area, we need policies encouraging this migration towards the rural area by investing in infrastructure, by a good connection to high-speed internet, but we also need medical, health and education infrastructure for the children in rural areas. And if we can manage to repopulate rural areas like this, there is indeed a possibility of reconciliating the rural and urban areas and having a more close connection between these two. Because if these people decide to move to the village, to the rural areas, they are prepared to support economic models of production, of sailing from villages to towns, and these people are open to towards the priorities we have at European level, namely a green approach, fighting climate change, or including new technologies, new digital technologies in everyday practice. They can disseminate knowledge, they can lead rural communities, they can bring a new meaning and a new way forward. The seminar I proposed comes at a crucial point of the European agenda, because we're just getting out of the COVID-19 pandemic, which put into question many of our certainties in many areas, which undermines the economic dynamic of our continent, and it pushes us to reconstruct. We have a recovery plan, an economic reconstruction plan, and this is not just a recovery plan. We want this plan to be oriented towards the future. This is a plan for the whole of Europe, for East and West, for North and South, and this has to be also a plan targeting both urban and the rural areas. So this is a crucial time to discuss about this reconciliation, to see how we can integrate the rural area specificity in a positive way. In the Green Deal and the fight against climate change, the rural area can be part of the solution. And let me provide one example. By stimulating the local agri-food production and by establishing a link between the rural and urban areas, we can reduce the transport distance when it comes to transporting food, we can reduce the emissions and the consumption of fossil fuel. The digital agenda must also be a key element in order to render and to facilitate access to services in member states. We saw in the last few months how telework developed very much and how the digital platforms developed to make contact with one another, not just professionally, but when it comes to access to services as well, when it comes to ordering online, ordering food and not only food. So the digital dimension plays a key role both in rural and the urban area. And this must be a lesson that we need not just investment in digital infrastructure, but investments in transport, vocational training, investments in accessible health services in the rural area as well. Of course, I can't help but mentioning the CAP, which is still a main pillar for what we want to do in the rural area. And I'm sure the CAP needs to be profoundly modernized in order to raise to its expectations, but it is not enough. We also have to see how the cohesion policy and other modern financial instruments of the European budget can be accessed and open to the rural area. So today, I would like us to adopt this rural perspective to see the considerable potential for our society of tomorrow, for our young people, and for the intergenerational renewal. I'm convinced that rural thinking will allow us to move forward, not just from the point of view of sustainable development, but with bringing about new solutions. And I'm convinced that representatives of the rural networks from across the EU present here today will share with us their year-long experience. They will share with us their expectations developed to make contact with one another, not just professionally, but when it comes to access to services as well, when it comes to ordering online, ordering food and not only food. So the digital dimension plays a key role, both in rural and the urban area. And this must be a lesson that we need not just investment in digital infrastructure, but investments in transport, vocational training, investments in accessible health services in the rural area as well. Of course, I can't help but mentioning the CAP, which is still a main pillar for what we want to do in the rural area. And I'm sure the CAP needs to be profoundly modernized in order to raise to its expectations, but it is not enough. We also have to see how the cohesion policy and other modern financial instruments of the European budget can be accessed and open to the rural area. So today, I would like us to adopt this rural perspective to see the considerable potential for our society of tomorrow, for our young people, and for the intergenerational renewal. I'm convinced that rural thinking will allow us to move forward, not just from the point of view of sustainable development, but with bringing about new solutions. And I'm convinced that representatives of the rural networks from across the EU present here today will share with us their year-long experience. They will share with us their expectations. And this debate, where it is our pleasure to have Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen here present, as well as the president of the EIB, Werner. I also invited my colleague in the EP, Irache Garcia Perez, the president of the S&D group. Besides, we worked together on rural issues, as well as other people that are going to intervene. Let's have a debate at this webinar, a debate allowing us to draw useful conclusions, useful to everybody. Dear Ursula, I would like to give the floor to you now, and let me thank you for having accepted our invitation, for being with us here today. I know you won't be able to stay with you until the end of the debate, but the other colleagues from the European Commission will be here with us, and we are going to share with you the conclusions of these discussions. Thank you once again for having accepted to give an introductory speech. You have the floor, dear Ursula.
Yes, thank you so much, Dacian, and thank you for inviting me to give the keynote. And hello to all of those who are joining right now. Indeed, the countryside is my home. That is where my roots are and where I've always returned, even if life and work had led me elsewhere. The countryside is where my family gets together. It's a tiny little village, about 140 inhabitants. We have 3 old retired horses getting their sandwich of graze, some chicken and a goat. And when I am there, each time the majesty of nature strikes me. And I must say, this is where I would like to see my children raise their children, surrounded by the colors and the sounds of nature. So Europe's countryside is part of who we are. Europe's beauty wouldn't be the same without the green of our valleys and hills. Europe's cuisine wouldn't be the same without the quality food that our farmers grow. And Europe's civilization wouldn't be the same without our culture, our traditions, the festivities in the rural area, its hardworking spirit. Europe wouldn't be whole without its countryside. And yet, as you said, Dacian, life in Europe's rural areas is changing. Droughts and floods have hit more frequently and violently. In a recent poll, 3 out of 4 European farmers say that climate change already has an impact on their daily work. Globalization exposes farmers to tougher competition, although it also offers new markets for food and other products. And as you said, Dacian, too many bright young people are leaving to chase jobs and dreams in the city. And infrastructure remains a problem. Where my family lives, I must say we have more dead spots than potholes. And when I want to make a phone call, I know exactly which room I have to go to in order to make the connection. But the tide could be turning if we make it turn together for the better of all of us. Because I'm convinced there's only one Europe, and we can turn the tide together, cities and countryside, east and west and north and south. We see that new solutions and new opportunities are already emerging from within Europe's rural areas. There's a new generation of farmers who are rediscovering traditional farming and food production while bringing innovation to their daily work with mobile apps and using data from satellites. A new kind of tourism is spreading, more respectful of nature and local communities. And families across Europe are now choosing local food production because they value quality and sustainability above anything else. So for millions of Europeans, progress means going back to our nature and rural roots with a brand new spirit. And as you said, Dacian, the coronavirus experience could be reinforcing this trend. Our mission is to accompany positive change, to invest in it, to make it kind of the antidote of the negative trends of recent years and decades. Through the years, the Common Agricultural Policy, as you said, the CAP, has been Europe's response to the needs of farmers and rural communities. And we must make sure that the new CAP mirrors today's reality and the needs of today's farmers. We know that we cannot act the same way in Andalusia as in Lapland. And even within the same country, different farms have different needs. In a country like Romania, you have the small-scale farmers of Transylvania, who are the guardians of the country's tradition and its amazing biodiversity, while industrial-size farming dominates the plains. So we need a policy that understands local needs and works for all, large and small, at all corners of the Union. And this is why we are trying to change our approach to rural development, not only in the Common Agricultural Policy, but also through the European Green Deal. We cannot micromanage a whole continent from Brussels, but together we can set the direction of our common work. Our message to rural communities should be like this: if you choose to go green and digital, it will pay off. Consumers are more and more interested in the quality of what they eat. And they are ready to pay a fair price for healthy and tasty food. That was not always the case, we know that. And every farmer understands this. What we are doing from Brussels is setting ambitious targets for the quality and sustainability of our food, targets on organic farming and animal health, targets on pesticides and fertilizers. Meeting these targets can create new opportunities for farmers, and it will help rural communities preserve their environment they live in, which is also their most valuable resource. So this is the underlying logic of our farm to fork and biodiversity strategies. And to help to reach these targets, we are ready to put considerable resources on the table. In fact, our latest proposal for the new European budget increases the resources for rural development and agriculture. New resources will come from our recovery plan, the so-called Next Generation EU. It is a plan for our countryside's next generation too. Young people from countryside should be empowered to follow their dreams without leaving their land. And for that, they need good jobs, they expect the right education, they deserve good digital and physical infrastructure. And this is what motivates the European Commission and hopefully, and I'm sure about that, the European Parliament and the Council to an agreement on the next budget and on the proposal for a new common agricultural policy. This is what we can do from here in Brussels. Give a vision for the future, set a direction, make resources available, and work together to identify new opportunities, explore new solutions, and replicate the successful ones elsewhere. The future of Europe's local realities can only be shaped locally. And for that reason, in the second half of 2020, we will launch a public consultation with rural communities, local authorities, and everyone who cares about the future of Europe's countryside. This consultation will lead to a new strategy, a new vision for rural Europe. This vision cannot be prepared in the city for the countryside. So I'm not here to present a ready-made plan for rural communities. Today, it is about your ideas and your contribution. And thank you very much, Dacian, for organizing all this. This is so important. It won't just be a vision for rural Europe, but a vision from and by Europe, what I'm wishing for. So the European Union will be at the side of the rural community that want to shape a healthy and thriving future. We will be there with support and resources, with a new common agricultural policy, with the European Green Deal and Next Generation EU. We will be with you because a stronger and healthier Europe begins with a prosperous countryside. So let me wish you a fruitful seminar. Thank you very much for organizing it. It is absolutely timely, as you said, Dacian. It's the right moment to listen, to gather all these ideas, and then to embark on a common endeavor. And thank you very much for having invited me to this webinar.
Mulțumesc mult, Ursula, pentru prezență. Îți mulțumesc
Thank you very much, Ursula, for your presence. Thank you so much for having reinforced the announcement and the intention of the European Commission to launch a common debate related to the future of the rural areas, to bring a new strategy for rural areas. You have made this announcement as of the beginning of the mandate of your Commission. Thank you so much for having reinforced this message, which will be very useful for the representatives of the different rural networks from various EU member states. They will know as of now what is the vision of the European Commission, your own vision as the president of the EU Commission. And this is a very strong signal you're sending. You have been here, you have sent this important message. Thank you so much for your presence. I know you won't be able to attend the rest of the seminar, but the colleagues, your colleagues from the Commission will stay among us and become aware of the result of the debate. Thank you very much once again. I hope to see you again soon, and I shall send you the conclusions of today's debate, I promise. During the conclusions, Norbert Linz, the president, the chair of the Agri Committee, and Pascal Confin, the chair of the Envy Committee within the European Parliament, shall also be there. So two group leaders who support the rural approach. I am sure that we will be able to work as partners in the future as well. Thank you so much, dear Ursula. Now, I would like to give the floor to Werner Hoyer, who is the president of the European Investment Bank. When we speak about the rural environment, when we speak about public investments and EU priorities, we focus on the MMF, and we always speak about the financial resources of our budget. But the EIB has increased its resources quite a lot during the last years, has a lot of experience with InvestEU, for instance, in various member states. However, unfortunately, the reflex of the private environment is to focus on investments in urban areas. And almost naturally, banks have also developed this orientation towards the urban environment. As far as via the EIB, there are also important resources that can be adapted towards the rural areas for small and medium enterprises and projects specific to the rural environment. We should do it. This is why I invited Werner Hoyer, and thank you so much, Werner, for having said yes to my invitation. And you are here to present the perspective of the EIB concerning the need to ensure financial resources for investments destined also to the rural environment. Werner, you have the floor.
Oh, sorry, I had been remotely muted, but I should be back now, right? Yes, very good. So, dear President von der Leyen, dear Dacian Cioloș, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be with you here this afternoon. I would like to thank you very much for having me, and I thank especially Dacian for organizing this important event, which addresses a really significant part, an aspect of Europe's future development, the role of rural Europe. That we meet here today virtually rather than in person reflects the fact that Europe and the world are going through an unprecedented public health crisis. So before sharing with you the bank's approach and outlook on today's topic, I would like to briefly update you on the EIB Group's support to the EU economy in relation to COVID-19. To date, we have approved financing for over 10 billion euros to help struggling companies. And these companies are not unhealthy. They are basically very sound and healthy, but they have difficulties to cope with a totally unexpected liquidity crisis for a couple of months. These funds are benefiting companies across Europe. They're expected to mobilize around 34 billion of investment. So supporting the real economy, and this is a crisis of the real economy, not a crisis of state finances, is where the EIB Group is best placed to provide what Europe and its citizens need. That's why we propose to establish a pan-European guarantee fund in response to COVID-19 to support especially the working capital and liquidity needs of small and medium-sized companies. The financing to be generated by this fund, combined with other urgent measures announced by the EIB Group, can generate funding on a scale of around 1.5% of the European Union's GDP. Let me also say a few words about the revised multi-annual financial framework and the recovery package. And we don't know all the details yet. I think probably Charles Michel, Ursula von der Leyen, and Angela Merkel will wrap up the negotiation package the next days. Mobilizing financial means at an unprecedented scale, they have the potential to become an excellent opportunity for putting the economy back on track for a green, digital, and inclusive transformation, and to sow the seeds for a stronger European economy. Some people ask the question, when will we finally be back where we left 4 months ago? We will not go back there. We must take the opportunity to shape the future of the European Union. During this crisis, we have seen, like under a magnifier glass, where the difficulties, where the shortcomings of Europe's companies, European industries, European societies are. And this is in particular in the field of digitalization, in the field of innovation, and in the field of sustainability. Our position on this package focuses on things we know and do best: financial instruments and budgetary guarantees to support programs such as the Juncker Plan, FC, in the current MFF, or InvestEU, the Just Transition Mechanism, and DG in the next MFF. Such an ambitious plan, much needed and fully supported the biological potential of land and the seas to sustainably produce food and biomass, will be severely affected by climate change. And besides its ecological importance, rural development and the bioeconomy are of course crucial for addressing the socio-economic divide at regional and international level, and for not leaving any region behind. So against this background, the EIB support to the bioeconomy over the last 5 years reached about 33 billion euros in total, and has remained stable at around 10% of total EIB lending. We are in particular working with financial intermediaries that support access to finance for agricultural SMEs and young farmers, such as AgriCover in Romania, PBZ in Croatia, and Crédit Agricole en France. Let me stress here that young farmers need to be supported with priority. They are key for the future of the sustainable rural Europe. The bioeconomy sector is also central to our lending in our partner countries outside of the EU, according to the mandates that the European Union, that the EIB has in place for the EU Commission. The EIB lending objectives for agriculture and the bioeconomy follow EU policies and priorities, of course. For example, a key requirement for a competitive and vibrant rural economy is additional investment in innovation and skills in all subsectors of the bioeconomy. EIB has been financing research and innovation aiming at making agricultural production systems more resilient through better inputs such as improved seeds or alternative biopesticides for the EU market. The EU Bank has also supported circular economy projects along the food value chains, helping agro-industry to become more resource efficient, reduce food wastages, and substitute plastics with compostable biomaterials in packaging. Rural development investments targeting afforestation or the modernization of rural infrastructure with a strong focus on IT connectivity and rural broadband are equally important to enable smart and eco-efficient agriculture. Ursula von der Leyen just touched upon this important point. Such enabling investments are key to the attractiveness of rural areas to make them more vibrant. And this also closely links to the territorial integration objectives in the European Union. Recent examples of EIB-financed projects comprise national contributions to rural development programs in several member states, investment in rural broadband infrastructure, the improvement of irrigation, for example, in Portugal, or the financing of flood protection schemes. With 5.7 billion euros invested during the past 5 years, the EIB is also one of the largest providers of finance to the forest sector worldwide. In addition to direct investment loans, support to SME and mid-caps is a strong priority for EIB finance. As previously mentioned by financial intermediaries, around 80% of EIB group lending to the sector is channeled to farmers, cooperatives, and small SMEs along the bioeconomy value chain. A recent 700 million euro agricultural program loan for SME and mid-caps attests to the difficult access to finance that is prevalent in this sector across the EU. It was taken up by the market within just a few months after its launch. EIB Vice President Andrew McDougall will take the opportunity to stay with you and take the floor during the first panel to present to you in further detail our actions in support of rural development and closing the divide between rural and urban areas. And this is the big objective. Let me add that to further address inefficiencies in access to finance, our advisory services and the European Investment Fund have been very actively developing new financial instruments based on national and structural funds in close cooperation with DG Agri of the Commission and the national managing authorities. Examples include France, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, Greece, and Romania. Such agricultural mandates currently amount to roughly 2.5 billion euro of targeted financing across countries. They provide access to loan finance in advantageous conditions to a huge number of farmers and SMEs along the agri-food value chain. Of course, many policy objectives in agriculture still require subsidy-based delivery mechanisms. Against the background of reducing agricultural budgets at EU level, financial instruments are a cost-efficient, cost-effective way to enable viable investments in support of vibrant, self-sustaining rural economies. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude on this point, please let me highlight that there is great potential and aligned interest in support of the European Union Green Deal and the new Common Agricultural Policy objectives through financing projects in the bioeconomy. In the last 5 years, the EIB has increased the percentage of direct lending to the bioeconomy sector that qualified as climate finance, reaching the milestone of 50% climate action across all direct bioeconomy lending in 2019, which enhances our credibility as the EU climate bank as well. Enhancing our focus on these subsectors and activities should allow the EIB Group to further increase its contribution to green rural development objectives within the EU and beyond. And I thank you very much for your attention. Congratulations on this fascinating conference, and let me wish you a productive afternoon.
Mulțumesc, Werner, mulțumesc mult pentru participare și pentru toate aceste lucruri pe care le-ai
prezentat. Thank you, Werner, for what you said. We will have the chance to continue this discussion about the rural area and the involvement of the EIB, in particular in the context referred to by Mrs. von der Leyen, namely the public debate related to the future of the rural area, where we would have to talk specifically about how we are going to act in the rural area, what are the measures we are going to take. Thank you once again for taking part in this event. I know that the EIB Vice President, Andrew McDowell, will be staying with us and will be able to answer some questions. So thank you very much once again for having participated, having attended this webinar, and hope to see you soon. I will now give the floor to my colleague Irache Garcia Perez, who is now chairing the S&D group in the European Parliament. But she is closely involved professionally and personally to what is happening in the rural area. And in the past, we have had the opportunity to collaborate, to work together in this area. And in this capacity, I invited her to join us today. I know she's also concerned about the role of women in rural area, but I'm going to leave her to tell us about it and to speak to us about her vision of rural areas and what we can do from here. Thank you, Irache.
Muchas gracias, Dacian. Por supuesto,
Thank you very much, Dacian. And first of all, I would like to thank you for having organized this event, and I would like to thank you for having invited me to participate at it. Because as you very well say, we have now certain responsibilities within the European Parliament by leading several political parties, but in the past, we have also been able to work in countryside development, rural development, and this is also going to be part of our leadership, and this is also a priority for us within the European project and all the many challenges that lay ahead of us. You were saying something at the beginning which is very important, the fact that we need to be aware about all the challenges that are on the table today in the countryside, in the rural areas. And it is also very important that we understand that we are not here between a rural versus urban debate or where we prioritize our political action. This goes far beyond this debate. We need to know how to plan our European territory and how to balance it while guaranteeing equal opportunities. In the past term, there was a report on demographic challenges in Europe. I come from a region, Castilla y León in Spain, mainly a rural region with a high depopulation, and this is also a challenge for us, and this must make us understand that when we are making ideological reflections about the European project, we need to take into account the dimension between urban and rural and redimensioning all of this. At the same time, we have to follow this trend because 80% of the European population lives in 20% of the territory, which means that we have 80% of the European territory with scarce population, but with a huge richness in terms of biodiversity, environmental resources, natural resources, and we need to be able to guarantee that this goes in line with our objectives. Prosperity and recovery rural areas is, of course, a priority of the European project, and to make sure that rural areas are a reality in the European policies, we need to tackle the challenges. On the one hand, the depopulation levels, the demographic gap. We have areas with very scarce population, persistent inequalities, gender inequalities. Those of you who have worked on agriculture and rural development know that there are many men in the rural area opposed to women, and this is also something that is a barrier as well when we talk about the future of sustainability in the rural